Well, we're going to dive right into our next leader, our next speaker. The next person that we're going to talk about, that we're going to meet, is Pastor Fred Faradays from Nairobi. And Pastor Fred, like Rudy and Lauren, he is one of those leaders who has become not only a dear, dear friend of mine, but also someone who is an inspiration and someone who I look to as a model of someone I want my faith to look like his. I want my life to be like his someday. Now, Pastor Fred, he lives in a very difficult location, Kibera Slum in Nairobi, and Kibera is one of the largest slums in East Africa. It is very, very crowded. There's all sorts of estimates on how many people live there, but imagine about 800,000 people perhaps living in about 3 square kilometers. It's not a lot of space. And with that, there's a lot of poverty, there's a lot of unemployment, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the things that are faced by the people living in Kibera, but all you need to know is that it is not a very conducive place for effective ministry. People are being uprooted all the time. There are tragedies happening constantly. And there are so many unknowns, and life, even just living in Kibera, comes with vast uncertainty about what the future will hold. One great example of this is in a video we're going to watch right now as Pastor Fred comes up to join me. This is a video that I made in 2012 about an unexpected act by the government, which actually had significant ramifications for the church and the school that Pastor Fred leads. And I should say, the church that he leads is called Tumaini Church. Tumaini is Swahili for hope. And the school is called the Hope Academy. And they have, I don't even know, 300, how many children? How many students do you have now? How many? 375? Okay. So it's a lot of students, and they are continuing to grow. And they are also considering expanding and starting their own high school so they can continue to walk with children from very young ages all the way through to adulthood. So let's watch this video of what happened in 2012. Pastor Fred, if you'd come join me.
I've come here to Kibera Slum to spend some time with my dear friends at Tumaini Church. As I've recently discovered, Tumaini Church and its elementary school, the Hope Academy, are in the middle of a crisis that shows just how deep systemic injustice can go.
Kibera is the largest slum in East Africa. Hundreds of thousands of Kenyans live in tiny shacks made from wood, mud, metal, whatever they can find. Unemployment is rampant, education is low, and with sewage often running in open gutters, physical health has become more of a luxury than a right. Although life here is a struggle, most people find a way to survive. Through ingenuity, strong community ties, and the help of ministries like Tumaini Church, they manage to keep the challenges of life in balance. That is, until someone comes from the outside to tip the scales. Recently, a politician who owned some nearby land decided to build some apartment buildings. As a result, a highway bypass road being built by the government needed to be diverted straight through Kibera. Any day now, bulldozers will begin the demolition. Over 1,000 people will lose their homes, their businesses, and their community. Tumaini Church and the Hope Academy are not exempt. Half of their property has been marked for destruction. I spoke with a few small business owners to get their thoughts on the situation.
Nashindwa nitafanya nini, yani sijui kwenye nitaenda.
Mimi hata sina hata ile kitu naweza kufanya. Sasa hata nikifikiria penye naweza kuenda hakuna.
Ninalia sana, tena nashangaa kwa nini sasa wanabomoa hata shule.
This is Caps Tieno, or this is my grandson.
Arthur Akuku provides for 6 family members with his small convenience store.
All my family are depending on my side. Yes, I'm the breadwinner. In fact, I used to work. And when I was given my benefits, all of them I poured at that place. So at present, I'm stranded. I don't know what to do. Even my kids are asking me, Bob, where are you going? Where are you going? But then I said, God knows. I don't know where I'm going at present. So I'm stranded. Yes.
Systems of injustice have a way of shutting doors for people. If Arthur loses his shop, he won't be able to afford to send his children and grandchildren to school. Without an education, these kids will have a hard time finding jobs when they're older. It becomes almost inevitable that they will perpetuate the cycle of poverty when they have families of their own. Things seem pretty bleak to me, but not to Tumaini Church and the Hope Academy. Not once in my conversations with them did they talk about closing up shop.
The big question for me is now how do I make the gospel practical to our people who are faced with social and economic extinction? It would be a bit of a betrayal. For me, it would be a bit of a betrayal to leave this community at a time when they really need a hand, somebody to walk with them. We want to stand up for that and say we were there when it happened.
The staff of Tumaini feel called by God to help break through the systems of injustice in their community, and that's exactly what they're going to do.
As you can see, when systems of injustice are layered together, even the simplest of decisions can create consequences that ripple through a community. But here, in this small corner of Kibera Slum, is a ministry that refuses to give in to despair. The kingdom of God is alive and well here, and Tumaini Church isn't going anywhere.
So, Pastor Fred, what we predicted in that video of the bulldozers coming and destroying a big section of the slum, that happened. They came and they knocked down a lot of homes. Many of homes were people that were in your church, students that were in your school. Can you talk? What happened next? What was the result?
Yeah, I think just looking at that is very nostalgic to look at some of the faces that later ended up not being part of what you're doing now because there was the demolition that came. But as you've seen from the video, this is the third demolition that took place. We've existed in Kibera for 13 years, and this is the third time the government was coming to demolish the place. And so yes, they did. They came, they demolished the place, and it was so heartbreaking because some of the families that we'd really invested our spiritual resources and our energies into serving, their families were demolished and they had to move. Some of them, it was very hard to follow up and find out where they went to. After being there for 13 years, this is one of the many times that I've wanted to leave Kibera because it's been heartbreaking. I have wanted to leave Kibera, not once, not twice, and this was one of the times that I really wanted to leave. So when the demolition came and some of the families that we'd invested in, their families were demolished and their livelihoods were messed up, I had decided that I wanted to leave. And I made up my mind to leave, but I had only one condition, that nobody was going to turn up because that happened during the week. And I'd made up my mind that I'll come in on Sunday morning, and if nobody turns up that Sunday, then I'll only have one other Sunday, and when nobody else turns the other Sunday, then I can be able to close down shop and go. So when the demolition was through and a lot of families had been messed up and our property had been pulled down, I came to church on Sunday, of course, as a good pastor, dressed nicely, and I was waiting, and inside my heart, I was hoping that nobody would come because I did not know what to tell the people who would come, and because I was also going through a lot of crisis at that time, I didn't know how to behave. Unfortunately, some people turned up, a couple of families turned up, and I lost my chance of leaving at that point. And so I continued ministry. We came up, we collected some of the debris and some of the things that we would salvage, put them up together, and started from scrap, not only in the physical structures, but trying to minister to the different families that remained, and just starting to build again, which was a bit painful, but yes, there was no way I was going to live when there were few families that still existed at that time.
So you stayed put even though you really wanted to leave?
Yes, I needed to leave, but I didn't want to leave when there was anybody who was still coming over and who accepted me to do anything for them.
Now, the demolition, I mean, that's only one drop in the bucket. There's so many other things that you guys face, difficulties, hardships that your congregation faces, that you face as you're trying to minister to them. What are some of the other challenges that Tumaini Church that you face in your ministry?
I would say that the demolition is from outside is an attempt to be able to destroy the slums from a physical point of view, physically to be able to destroy and pull down the structures of the people. But this, the systems that have caused Kibera to be an interesting place to minister in is because there are so many challenges that go through in the lives of the people. Looking at the structures that you've seen, and for some of us who've seen Kibera as it were, there's so many things that there are challenges that are going through. One of the big challenges is there's a lot of domestic violence and child abuse that is so rampant, and that is causing the cycle of poverty and a lot of insecurity in the slums. And the social, the abuse, the child abuse and the domestic violence is something that us as a church we are trying to combat, but it's at different levels. There are three stakeholders into that, that bit of thing about how you deal with that. There is so far that the church can be able to do, because there is the culture that allows part of that domestic violence, and so you cannot come in as a church to be able to start dealing with these things. And then there is the bit that the government needs to do. So as a church, you only have a say in the people who come into the congregation and some of the children that you minister to, but in the whole community, you would not be able, you are not an authority, you cannot be able to come in and say, this is what we think as a church, because nobody really cares what you think as a church. And then there is a level that only the government can be able to come in and be able to sort. So
even if you worked really, really hard to handle this case and this individual case and help this child, like, you're not changing the culture, you're not changing the system.
Yes, you're trying to do things. We have a couple of instances that we have had cases of incest, and when we came in trying to deal with that, then the family was saying, okay, this is not how you deal with things like that, because you're not even members of your congregation. And then there are cases of rape when we even handed that to the government, and the children come in, and after 2 weeks, the children are still walking free, and there is nothing that you can really do about. And then there is lots of poverty. There is a lot of children who are orphaned by HIV and AIDS, and so food is a problem, and the social structures, there is a lot of vulnerability, especially for the teenage girls. So that as much as you are hoping that something would come up for to be able to change, a lot of other things are going on in the community. So it's not a big thing. You're not being a big influence, but you can only be able to reach very few, and the people who then are very close to you.
Yeah. Now, what most people here probably don't realize is that you are not from Kibera. Kibera is not your home. You were from Western Kenya. You got a good education. You had every possibility in the world to become a pastor, well-paid pastor at a nice church. You could be living very comfortably. You could be living a good life and not have to suffer through all of the difficulties. And yet you've surrendered a lot of that. Can you talk about what do you think of when you think of the word surrender? When you think of surrendering to Jesus, what does that mean for you? Because you've given up so much to be in this position.
For me, the word surrender or surrendering to Jesus has to do with the bit of incarnation, where the scripture speaks about Christ being incarnated into being like us. The word became flesh and lived in our neighborhood, as it were. He came and became flesh and lived among us. And I was looking at that in terms of how does that mean in my life as being able to surrender, because thinking through becoming a Christian, of course, I was from a Catholic background, and for me, surrendering to Christ when I became born again, it was not like a normal thing, because I had to face some bits and pieces of struggle. But then I have come to realize that the word incarnation and the word surrender had to do with moving on to thinking through how you surrender, make the big decision of surrendering to Christ, and then you have to move to the second step of following Christ where he leads you. And where he leads you, then he will be able to direct you, because we know that he's a good shepherd, and he will lead you to that the direction he wants to lead you, and that is surrender. But then the biggest surrender is not the big thing of surrendering just because I want to follow Christ and serve him there, but also the day-to-day decisions that I have to make every day. So a lot of times people think that I made a very big sacrifice into walking into Kibera, but experientially what I have gone through and the things that are going on, it is more costly to live in Kibera and to make a decision to stay in Kibera than just walking there and saying, I want to live among you and I want to be able to experience what you're going through and to decide to know how it is to become a Christian in your circumstances. So it has to be the big surrender of giving your life to Christ, and then the smaller bit of following Christ where he leads you, and then the day-to-day surrender that you have to decide every single morning. Because even as you see those guys, they're not like small angels that they'll be clapping for you every time you walk into their homes. There are challenges and you have heartaches and you have issues going through, but I have to make every single decision every morning that I have to go there because I want to give up something. I want to be able to incarnate myself into what is going on. So that for me, that is surrender.
Yeah, it's like the new image I'm using is that of an onion. It's like a surrender onion. You do the big outside surrender, and then you're in the inside. You have to surrender again, and you have to surrender another level, and it keeps going and going. Yeah. One of the things that you really had to struggle with was when you started the ministry as a young single man, which gives you a lot of freedom and flexibility. You can kind of do things, but then you chose to get married, and now you have children. You have 3 little children. That must have been a difficult decision to decide to bring someone else into the sacrifice that you're making. Can you talk about that? What went through your mind as you were preparing to get married and actually have a family in those circumstances?
Wow, I think that is another bit that I had struggled with, and it was a decision that I needed to make. And for your records, I'm not very young as it looks. I am 39 now, and I got married like about 80 years ago. So that is, according to our culture, that is very late. I have 2 sons. One is 7, one is 5 years, and I have a daughter just about 9 months. And every time, going back to the concept of surrendering, it's being able to take the cross, as Christ said, taking your cross and following Christ where he leads you. And I knew it was going to cost me, so I wanted to be very sure before I got married. And surprisingly, that is a time that I was not really walking by faith, because I knew this was such a big task. And I didn't want to lose both. I knew if I got married without being very sure, then I was going to lose either my ministry or my marriage. So that was a very big point that I needed to make a decision. And when I got married to my wife, of course, that's a different story. We got married and we've been living together for the last 8 years, which is a good thing. She's a strong woman. But the bits that I have to, the decision, the cost that I have to pay with that is that at every limit, at every bit, it has always been the point where how am I willing to sacrifice the comfort of my own family for the bigger bit of the kingdom? As Christ says that whoever loves his family more than he loves me is not worthy of the kingdom. So, but God being very gracious gave me a very understanding wife, and we've gotten to a point that she can be able to understand. We go through a few hardships, some of the things that as a family we go through. Some of them are financial, some of them are emotional, some of them are just the way people treat you and the way people look at you. But the bigger decision now that we have to make, that I'm not even sure whether we've made that yet, is looking at the circumstances that the children are being raised in the slums, and that is what my cry is out for, that I cannot be able to reach that big number of the people. And my 2 sons and my daughter are, as it were, now going to grow in that slum, and that needs a lot of faith. And I'm waiting for a time that we're going to sit around a table, and my son tells me, okay, now that you've been here for a long time, we really don't think we want to be here. So it's something that I do not really have figured together, but we're willing to walk that direction. If God allowed me to be there, and he brought someone, very insensitive wife, and she decided to walk along with me, I am hoping that my sons along the way will be able to understand what we are in. And for the time being, I think that's a decision that we want to go through, keeping our eyes very, very open, and of course we are taking one step at a time.
Well, this is not in the notes. I can speak as a pastor's son myself, and I think this will be true for you as a father of a pastor's child. For me, watching my father live with such integrity and such sacrifice in his own ministry was part of what led to me living out my ministry today. And I have a feeling that Fadili and Fortune, they will watch you and they will see the integrity that you have. And I think they're going to understand. Maybe they won't understand all the circumstances, and maybe they will wish they had a bit more money or comfort or something, but they are going to understand what it means to follow Christ by watching their dad. So,
and surprisingly, that was an encouragement when I was at the Covenant community yesterday, and I was thinking, okay, so it is completely not impossible. It is possible to be in ministry even when you've seen your father go through a lot of stuff and suffer. It is still possible that God can be able to find a way of getting into your children. So it's, again, getting back to walking by faith. And I will not be surprised. My Fadili is seriously interested in what I'm doing, and I hope he will not learn some of my bad traits, but I think he'll be in for good ministry.
He's a sharp kid. He's smart. He's cool. He's cool. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about maybe one of your lowest points in ministry, and maybe what's one of your highest points in ministry?
I'll talk about two incidences that happened. Over the time that we've started the ministry, the second year when we were doing ministry, I had a small group of young men that I was discipling. They gave their lives to Christ, and I was so happy, and we started this young youth ministry, and it was going well. One of the young men that was in my ministry happened to have been part of a gang in his past life, and I met him, and in 3 months he started getting into discipleship, and he was part of the leadership. So at about 25 young people that we were discipling, and we were 3 months into the discipleship, and then one night an incident happened that the gang that he belonged to initially, his name was Douglas, the gang that he belonged to attacked another neighborhood, and they killed somebody in robbery with violence. And that night, I was with him, and we were with some other boys, and he left my house at 11 p.m. to go and sleep. The incident took place at 10. And so I am sure he was not part of the team. But the following day, as we walked in the slum trying to do evangelism and try to reach the other boys, he was spotted by the team, part of the group that was combing the slums to find the people who were involved, and he was lynched. He was just beaten by stones, and he died in my presence, and that was so painful. That is something that has been that has kept, it was another of all those opportunities that I really wanted to go. And along the way, in the last 13 years, we've lost about nine children who were part of our discipleship, and there was no way you are going to go to a gang and tell them, I'm now born again, I've left you. So he did not do that. And I know, because he wasn't involved, I know he was born again already, and that was so painful for me. The second thing happened a bit recently. There are several others, but I'm picking this because it's something that we're still dealing with. The government, when they were doing the demolition, decided to do almost like a highway, a bypass, a road passing right through the slums. And that road has become more of a curse to the people in the slum than a blessing, because it's supposed to serve the city, and it's completely oblivious about the needs of the children of the slums. And just in the last 5 months, we've lost 7 children who have been hit by speeding cars. 2 of them were from our school, and that is so painful. And surprisingly, the government has not said a word. They're not planning to do anything about it, and it's just like a car hit a dog somewhere on the road. And so for me, that is very painful, and we really don't know how to tackle that. So those are parts of bits and pieces that we've gone through. the high points of what I have seen that has kept me moving is I have seen some of those young men that you saw there. I think we didn't hear their voices, but there are two young men there. One of them is James and one of them is Vincent. They were part of the very early discipleship that we did. And we have seen them grow, and I have seen their lives being transformed. And even when they had the opportunity to walk out and do other things and be great men outside there, they've decided to come back and give back to the community. And as I look at that, it is possible for me to see that there is some hope. There is some hope at the end of the day that when I will finally go, somehow, there are people who have caught the vision, and we are headed somewhere. And so that is very encouraging, that as we lose others, as we probably may not be doing a big thing, but there is chances that we are heading there. Yeah.
You're leading what I call the ministry of staying put. You are being faithful to stay in one of the hardest places I can even imagine. I wanted to talk about the post-election violence. I don't think we have time, but maybe can you share one final thought, maybe an encouragement or something for people here who perhaps are interested in pursuing God's call on their life? As someone who's surrendered your life to Christ and is doing that, how would you encourage them?
I think my one encouragement is that where God is calling us, there is always an aspect of surrender. It doesn't matter whatever neighborhood you are in, God will be asking us to surrender something. And the challenge, the course that God will be asking us is, what would it mean for us to carry the cross and follow Christ? And what would be the cross in our context? What would be the cross in your context? What would it be to surrender something little every single day as you wake up and as you move on with what you are doing? I mean, it would be some that like what Barry did and living in the slums. That is something that is crazy, that should not be, probably God would not be calling you to do. But what would it mean for you to carry the cross? And just defining that we have to be surrendering something. There is something that we must be giving up every single day if we are going to follow Christ, and we must follow in his footsteps. So it's the surrender, and it's defining what the cross means in your different context.
Thank you, Pastor Fred. Would you guys thank Pastor Fred?
Thank you.